Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 217 of our regular shows, and we're recording this on August 23rd, 2020. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbender.online.com. I'm going to be your main host, Morgan, Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, on today's show, we have a decent amount of news to talk about, but the main topic is going to be our continuation from the last podcast, which is going to be our review for the Shadow of Kyoshi. So last time out, we did the first third of the book. This time out, we're going to be doing the middle section of the book, and then on the next podcast, we'll finish off our discussion on Shadow of Kyoshi with the final section, the final third of the book. So yeah, let's open up with the news. There's been actually a good amount, especially one really big piece of news, which we'll discuss at the end here. So the first piece of news just recently came out, and it's that we finally have a new picture of, it's actually both of the Series 3 action figures, but the Ozai looks very similar to the one it did before. I think everyone agreed that was like the best looking figure of the ones that we got previewed. But the Toph, who's also part of Series 3, she looks a good bit different than she did before. There was a lot of issue discussions and stuff like that with the way it looked initially. Her head looked really, really massive, and I think they definitely got the feedback on that. And this, we only have one new image, but it definitely looks improved straight away, just with an extra little bit of detail. I definitely think they have made the head a little bit smaller, and so it definitely looks much more in proportion. I still think it maybe looks just a little bit too big still, but nowhere near as bad as it was before. I think it definitely is like completely acceptable where it is right now. But Greg, what are your thoughts on the Toph figure here?
Yes, definitely an improvement on what they had before. I think that was just really, probably just like really just done a bit too quickly or just pre-release for that one. But yeah, I think the proportions on the head definitely feels better. I do kind of get your idea of sort of it still feeling a little bit too big. I don't know, maybe it's just the thickness of the neck in relation to the head seems a bit sort of off, because I think the proportions of the body itself overall I think are pretty good, and it feels like her character. So I think that definitely works as far as what they're going for. I mean, I don't know, overall for some reason this figure just doesn't feel as good to me. I don't know if it's just how they designed it in general, or just sort of maybe it's just the way that they took the image for the still for this product placement on the actual image here. But just compared to Ozai, when they have them as sort of like the set where they both come together, Ozai just looks so much better overall. I mean, I don't know if I would particularly get either one of them in general, but just comparing the two of them, it just doesn't feel like they're almost like the same level of quality almost, even though I know that they're in the same sort of like line here. But other than that, I think it's definitely pretty cool that we're getting a figure of her.
Yeah. This is where it comes into play. Like you said, these it's Ozai and Toph in Series 3. And there is a picture of them both like together for like the full Series 3 listing. And like obviously Toph is like half the size of Ozai, because Ozai is going to be our first like fully grown character, because all the other characters are teenagers, and Toph of everyone is like the shortest character. Yet they're both the same price, so you can see that they have like more space to work with Ozai, and that they just make a normal 6-inch action figure, whereas Toph has to be more like a, I suppose, 4-inch action figure, and you can tell that it just looks a lot smaller. Like Ozai's elbows compared to Toph's elbows, like it's very different. And already like some of the first wave, like it wasn't great with the joints, but it still looks like with Ozai like the same type of articulation. And that was obviously the weakness with the first wave, was just that the arm articulation especially is like terrible. Like you can't bend their elbows 90 degrees in like all of the figures basically. The only other thing that I think just remains a problem with these Diamond Select figures is just that they never tell you everything you get with them, right up until like very close to release. In that we have the picture from before of like theoretically what they come with, but that could have changed, and then they had the exclusive version and the non-exclusive version, and we don't know what that situation is again with this wave. So it's all a little bit confusing here in that, like, obviously Ozai's going to come with a fire effect part, Toph's going to come with some earth, but just exactly how much, and especially with Toph, you'd hope she comes with like a pretty big effect part given how small the figure is, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But yeah, this is obviously the way they're doing this. They're not doing 3-figure waves anymore. They're doing 2-figure waves. So the other 2 figures that are going to be wave 4 are the Sozin's Comet Aang to go with the Ozai, and then Sokka. And Sokka's the other one that I think everyone wants them to redo the head, because in his case the head was the right
Yeah.
size. It just didn't look like Sokka at all. So I really hope they can fix that one, and that's probably like an even trickier one, because it just felt like they sculpted him in like doing an expression like he's never ever done in the show, rather than just him having like a funny grin or something like that feels Sokka. So that's the big thing to look forward to there. And then I suppose they're saying these are going to ship January in or around, so I guess that means it'll probably be like May next year for the wave 4. But I suppose they're going to have to get wave 5 into production, and that's going to be like the big one in terms of what characters come next. Like, they've done enough Angs, I think, at this point, with wave 2, and then there's going to be one in wave 4. I think like book 3 Katara is something some people want, and then like it pretty much kind of has to be like someone like Iroh, Suki, Mei, or Ty Lee, which would be the other like main characters. But just do you have any thoughts about kind of what's coming next for the Avatar action figures?
I don't know. I mean, I would hope that they would actually start branching into some of the lesser characters that we usually don't see, in the early release. Any of the sort of minor character. I think there's so many of them that they could do once they get, what they consider to be the main, our main core characters. I mean, I don't know. Even interesting that we're seeing like, just the characters that we have so far up front. I think it's interesting. But yeah, no, I mean, I think any of the minor characters, I think would be fun to have.
Mm-hmm. Next up, switching over to comics and books, we finally have the new cover for the Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Lost Adventures and Team Avatar Tales Library Edition. So this is going to be the book that collects those 2 short story collections together into a hardcover. And so the news here is, of course, the new cover, but also Rachel Roberts on Twitter confirmed that this book will actually have some extras, because I think if you look at the page count compared to the page counts of the 2 books, The Lost Adventures has like about 10 pages of preview for one of the art books at the back, so they're not going to get printed in this. So it leaves, I think, in or around 10 pages free that aren't accounted for. So we don't know what they are. I'm going to guess that the extras will be like Team Avatar Tales concept art stuff, just because I don't know if they would have that stuff for the Lost Adventures, given how old a lot of those comics are. But the new cover is by Chan Chow. It's very different looking. I do like it overall. I think it's nice to see a new artist, and it's kind of very bright. Appa looks huge in the background, but actually I think works quite well, and a lot of the background stuff really looks nice. But what are your thoughts on the cover here and the fact that there is going to be some extras in this short story collection?
Yeah, the extras definitely sounds like a cool, little nice bit. I mean, that makes it seem more worth it for, having this come back out, and, whatever the price is. It makes it, it seems like it justifies it a little bit more, to me at least, just because there is something more into it rather than just sort of bring it back out. In addition to having the new cover, which I agree also looks really well, I think it gets a different vibe than I think we're normally used to seeing. So for me, I think it definitely works.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that book's out October 28th, 2020, so it's actually not that far away. Next up, more news on the Avatar: The Last Airbender art of the animated series. So I think we covered the whole... I don't know if we did or actually not. Did we cover that there is a separate product that is the deluxe one versus the other one? It's happened in so many stages over the last few weeks, the news on this, and that it was initially just a reprint book, and there was a new introduction page by Gene Yang, but then all this extra information has come out, and now there's going to be a standard edition and a deluxe edition, and the main news that we have now is what exactly the deluxe edition actually is. So we'll start with just the picture that they have for the deluxe edition. So we knew it was going to come with like a lithograph and a slipcase and stuff like that, and that's what they show here. It's the same cover as the other book, the new Bryan Konietzko Avatar State Aang. It's all red and orange, really cool looking. But then they show the slipcase is obviously basically a box effectively to slide the full art book into, and it's white. It has the element symbols in the nation symbols in the background, and a kind of, I guess it's like meant to be sort of like an Aang symbol there with the glider and the clouds on one side. We don't get to see the other, but it's like cool, like a protective slipcase for like a really fancy deluxe art book like this. And then the lithograph looks to be the cover for the first edition of the Art of the Animated series, and it comes in this I guess it's just this kind of fold over sort of booklet type thing to keep it safe. Again, they don't really cover like materials that much here, but that seems to be the main thing. And then there'll be a ribbon bookmarker and stuff like that. There's still some confusion about what exactly is and is not exclusive to it, because they mentioned that there's 8 new pages of material plus the Jin Yang introduction. But then on the deluxe edition, they specify that it has an extra special cover treatment that they don't seem to mention on the standard edition. So it just feels weird in terms of production-wise that they're going to be basically printing the same book, but one is going to have like a ribbon bookmarker and like shiny edges, and then potentially it's just a cover that has a different treatment to the other one. But anyway, Greg, what are your thoughts on, I suppose, the deluxe package here for the art book?
I don't know. I think it's cool that they're giving us more for it. I mean, I think, like I mentioned the other one, the fact that they're adding these, extra bits in here, if you're really into sort of collecting and having these art pieces and, displaying this in the forefront in your home or wherever you live or just anywhere in general, I think it definitely seems like these are different things that you can sort of like, just spread out and, be able to admire whenever you want to. So from that perspective, I think it's definitely pretty cool. And, I guess the price for, a hardcover type book like this sort of seems like that's usually in sort of the range of what they would do. And, the new cover art is definitely pretty cool as well. So that even adds more value to it, I think. So no, I think it definitely seems pretty cool. It might be nice to have a bit more details, but I'm sure by the time, or at least I would hope by the time it comes out, if they don't, put up more details about like the actual like materials and stuff, that someone else will post it up somewhere.
Yeah, it's just an interesting one, because just based off the retail prices, the deluxe edition is twice the price of the other one, and I suppose the question really is that lithograph plus the slipcase worth the extra price? Because you're still getting the extra like new content in the new standard edition. I don't know. It's a weird one. Especially because of this other piece of news that is in the key selling points about this deluxe edition art book. It also mentions then, here's one of the points, tie-in design with future Legend of Korra deluxe art books. So we already had news that the Book 1 Air art book was going to be reprinted. I think we actually heard about that before the Avatar art book was announced as getting a reprint. Now this confirms to us that, like, okay, they are going to be reprinting all of the Legend of Korra art books, and they're all going to get a deluxe edition like this, and it will have tie-in designs in some way. So I don't know if that means that the covers will all be by Bryan Konietzko, or that the slipcases will all have a similar sort of graphical style, or that it just confirms that the lithograph for each one will just be the cover for the original edition. It's hard to speculate about, but I think it's going to be a hard ask for a lot of people, and even if they're targeting collectors, to just get the people to buy 5 deluxe art books that are basically done in the exact same style, where it's just a slipcase with some art, a lithograph that is just the cover of the previous one, and then the cover will be like slightly shiny or whatever. It's especially right now when we don't know if there's going to be extras in the Korra art books. I don't know if that's going to have the same appeal as the ATLA art book, which at least it being released now is fine because it's like 10 years old. But what are your thoughts on that? This isn't just a one-off. They're planning to do deluxe edition art books for every art book that they've done.
Yeah, that I can see definitely being a hard sell. I mean, I think it's definitely cool that they're going to somehow integrate them all together so that they seem like, they're part of the same set, whether that's like, like the side cover looking like they're all together or the art all being similar, just created by the same person or something along those lines. But with it being, double the price, like you said, and being essentially the same as before, I guess whatever they have as the extras, assuming that they have any in there, would have to really be worth it. And yeah, I guess taking into account that it isn't quite as much time in between them and just, what appeals to people in general, is that going to be enough? I mean, the ATLA one is pretty much everything versus Korra has different ones. So, would it be worth it for you to get it for every season? And since, there's definitely, I feel like there's more, just favoritism in general for certain seasons of Korra versus the others. So I would think that they would take that into, or at least I would assume they would take that into factor as well, as far as like which, seasons of books might do better. Like some people like season 1, some people like season 2 for certain parts, some people only like season 3 and 4 because of the villains. So I don't know, that's something to keep in mind. Like I mean, having, all of them myself, I don't know if that would be enough for me to wind up buying them all over again. Like, I mean, the extra art pieces definitely are nice, but I don't know. That seems like a tall order to buy them, especially if you already have them already.
Yeah, like especially the lithograph. I wish there was more information on what that actually like kind of means, because like lithograph, like I think usually is that it's not just like a piece of card, that it's printed on like metal or something like that usually. So if it is just like a kind of art print in a blue fold over binder type thing, that might not really appeal that much. But I don't know, what's your take on the lithograph itself?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you hear that, it sounds very, very fancy, which is kind of not what we're seeing in this little preview right now. And, that may just because these are just, like pre-visualizations of what they actually are. Like these could not be the real thing. Or, I don't know. It definitely seems like you would think that there would be more to it. And without the sort of extra explanation of what it really is, like you mentioned, it doesn't quite sell me on it yet. And it's the same size, so it's not like it's oversized or anything like that, where you can display it more like a poster. Like some of the books before have had like fold out posters that are like 2 times the size of whatever they're in. So that might be something that makes it really cool. That's more unique and makes it worth buying. This, I don't know, it doesn't quite seem like it's there yet, but we might have to wait on that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, like I hope it's like a really, really high quality printing, and it's like a super nice like piece of paper that has like some sort of like texture or something like that on it. Because if it was just say like the same sort of material that like the poster collection is made out of, like that definitely would make me like less likely to have any interest in the other ones. Because right now, like I have pre-ordered the deluxe Avatar art book just because people will want to know what it is, and it will be like make for a good video at least, and I want to see what the new stuff is. But at this point I'm kind of like with the Korra ones, like I'll probably get the book 2 one, in part because I just really, really like the cover for that one, and like book 2 is my favorite Korra book, and I just want to see what they do with it. But like I don't know, it'd take them announcing something pretty special to make me want to be completionist on getting the art books again. So we'll see what happens with that. So yeah, the 24th of November is the release date for both the deluxe and the normal edition of the second edition art book. So again, it's coming up in just a couple of months. We'll see what happens with it in regards to like if we get preview pages that maybe show off any of the new content. Again, my speculation is probably that it is comic stuff related to the comics, which only came out after the release of the initial printing. But and especially with Gene Yang doing the intro, I think that sort of makes sense. That and some of the more recent pieces of art done by the creators with regards to like Blu-ray covers and so on. I think that might be what we see in it. But yeah, the final piece of news, the big piece of news that kind of came out of absolutely nowhere, uh, basically just after we did the show like last time out, was that both Mike and Bryan, almost at the exact same time, released statements on their social media saying that they are both leaving the Netflix Avatar live action project, that they're no longer working on it, and they have absolutely no involvement whatsoever with it. And we'll slightly go through their statements as we go, kind of discuss this, but they are really making it clear to sort of distance themselves from this project at this point. The show hasn't been cancelled. I think Netflix did put out a very basic statement just saying that, like, you know, thanks to Mike and Bryan for their assistance, what they did on the show, but we're still going ahead with the production. So basically, I think for a lot of people, this show lost its main draw, and I've immediately seen opinion completely swing on it, of like no one particularly is that interested in this show anymore, whereas it previously it was more like, I'd say like almost 60-40, where like people were like 60% positive about it and then 40% of people like not really into it. Now it's really completely other direction, where it's like 10% of people still have hope for it, but everyone else is gone. And most of the 10% of the people are your typical Mike and Bryan aren't good writers, Arnie has did it all type people. So what are your thoughts on this announcement when you first heard this?
Yeah, it definitely was not something that I was expecting, but I guess, this is something like, unless you're really into the know or you have some sort of in with the production or something like that, like, I would assume most fans wouldn't see it. So the fact that we had like no idea about it is, not surprising. I saw it on Instagram because I follow them both on Instagram. So I saw the post there and I saw, like the initial reactions of people have it, and then, as it sort of spread out through like the Reddit and stuff. Like I saw that you saw the Facebook one, which I don't follow them on Facebook, so I didn't see even the responses on Facebook since I don't frequent there as much. But yeah, no, it definitely was surprising to see them sort of, push away from it and just see, I don't know what people, how, this might sort of survive going forward. It doesn't seem like you said it's canceled in any sort of way. I mean, other than just the fact that, productions in general are kind of like halted or in limbo, as they, figure out how to keep going with everything that's going on in the world. So, that's just another thing to consider with it in general. So I don't know. It's interesting considering, just what they mentioned initially with how production was going and how just I don't know, it's definitely intriguing to see how this has turned out. And I think I don't know where I particularly stand. I mean, I think I'll definitely still it's up there. Why not at least check it out to see what it is. But I don't know quite yet where my, I guess, hope level is for it, as can see many memes and stuff about it online.
Yeah, for me, this was a very interesting piece of news for me because like I've been really like clear and sort of vocal about like I've had like pretty much no interest whatsoever in this show, and I've had like worries about what this might mean for the future of the franchise. So them leaving the show is kind of like future of the franchise is safe, kind of, that this is this thing that can just come out and it does not matter what the quality level is, because it's not going to take over the entire franchise or anything like that. It's just going to be another Last Airbender type thing. Maybe it'll be better. I doubt it will be worse. And that's it. That it can just be like this very kind of casual, just relaxed thing of like, oh hey, the live action show is out, I'm going to watch it, rather than it being this super giant thing that I'm particularly invested in or care about. And I think the significant part of both of their statements is that they both clarify that they will be continuing to work in the Avatar universe. Now they don't like tease what that means necessarily, but like that means okay, they're going to continue to work on the comics and I guess future novels if there are any. But I don't think this directly means like we should immediately start the rumor mill, but I think it at least now presents the pathway to maybe in a few years that third animated series like is at least more on the table now than it was before. So like again, it's always difficult to speculate about because they've just had a bad creative experience working with Netflix, and then we know they had a sort of bad creative experience working with Nick with some of the production problems there. Do they want to get involved in that again? How would a third series come about? But I don't know. It's just like they seemed like they wanted to commit themselves quite heavily into this, but then it didn't work out. So I don't know. I just get the sense that they might want to do a project now that they're finally kind of willing to step back into things. So I don't know. It'll probably take a while for things to kind of like spool back up and for us to find out what they're working on. But I for the most part took this as being a pretty positive announcement, at least for the franchise and the aspects of it that I care about. Especially with the way they talk about some of this stuff. Like they both of their statements are pretty similar, just with the typical tones you expect. Of Mike is much more nice about things, and then Bryan is a little bit more blunt. In that they both specify that, like, in a joint announcement for the series, Netflix said it was committed to honoring our vision for this retelling and to supporting us on creating the series. And we expressed how excited we were for the opportunity to be at the helm. Unfortunately, things did not go as we'd hoped. And he's very, like, diplomatic about it. Productions are challenging and stuff like that. Whereas Bryan's one is more like when Netflix brought me on board to run this series alongside Mike 2 years ago, they made a very public promise to support our vision. Unfortunately, there was no follow through on that promise, and it's just so interesting the way that they go about this. Of like they both mention they want to continue working in Avatar. They both mention that like, hey, who knows? This thing might turn out okay, but it's not our thing, and like don't put our names on this basically going forward. And there's a lot of sort of lines like that where just reading it, it's just like it doesn't stand out, but then like you really analyze it and it's like, oh, that's pretty scathing when you kind of like look at it in context basically. But I don't know, is there anything specifically from their like statements and their exact wording that kind of stood out to you from the way they worded things and so on?
I don't know. I mean, I just the whole idea of just their, whatever their vision is, their, commitment to keeping the story true to what it was and how that wasn't sort of honored. I think that's interesting. I mean, I've seen a lot of people take different takes on what that means as far as what Netflix, or, whatever higher ups or production people or whatever, might have tried to add to, either, sway the story one way or the other or influence, casting or, there's so many different sort of variables that can be in play in this sort of thing. So I don't know. I think it's definitely something that's going to take, a lot of time for us to actually see what the real sort of like fallout of this actually is. And, if whatever Netflix does put out is, decent or better than, what we could have, hoped for, which I think for a lot of people, the bar wasn't necessarily too high to begin with. So, maybe that's a plus for Netflix, unfortunately, in that sort of regard there. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting. It's cool that they do want to be involved in, the franchise that they have created. I don't know about the whole, idea of them creating something more in the future, another animated series. I mean, the logistics of doing that with, who actually holds the IP is, a whole thing in itself, and just, them, wanting to be involved in that sort of, I don't know, process again. That definitely seems like something that might be a bit sour after this experience here. So, I mean, if that happens, I mean, it would be cool. I mean, I definitely would be totally into it, but that, I don't know. I don't really see that as something that's going to happen, even if it were to happen soon, like anytime soon or anything like that, I mean, I would hope, they would have a better chance on, creating something new on their own that might be interesting, even if it's not part of the Avatar, universe at all. I think that would be cool to watch. I'm totally down for that. It doesn't have to be Avatar as much as, we might want that to be. So no, I don't know, it's definitely something we just have to wait and see, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, I'll just read at the very last kind of section of Brian's post. I will continue to be deeply involved in the Avatar universe, telling the stories my partner and I want to tell in the way we want to tell them. I will put my time, energy, and talents towards the projects that give me the most fulfillment and where I am afforded trust and respect. Life is too short to do otherwise. Like, given what he's just said earlier on in the statement, that reads like, ooh, that's pretty telling about like how he views the way sort of Netflix did or did not give them creative control and stuff like that. Because like they're executive producers, showrunners on this show, and the takeaway seems to be that they basically weren't allowed to be that role because Netflix were getting in the way in some way. So it's going to take a while to do this because I think on Mike's post he said it was like back in like June or July that they left the show. So it hasn't been that long ago that they left. So anything that they're now more heavily involved with Avatar is only going to happen like we're only going to see the results of that in a couple of months. So I suppose for me the main thing would be that like I hope we can maybe see whatever is happening next with like Korra comics, Avatar comics getting sort of back on track, not just the one shot stories, and especially now that like, I think Mike is kind of done with his like novel series. Maybe he might want to do the next Avatar novel, like something like that. I think might be an option, but yeah, it definitely gives me more hope going forward for the franchise, at least. That no, we're completely out of the way of this confusion about like when the show previously was with them involved, and they were planning to expand the story of ATLA, and like how do we view that new information. Now anything that they change is just a completely different like continuity. It just doesn't matter at all because it's not involving the creators. So I like that that's there, and it just, like I said, we can just be very, very relaxed about whatever this thing is. But yeah, did you have any final thoughts on this big giant piece of news? Probably one of the biggest ones we've had in a while.
Yeah, I guess you can be relaxed about it. I guess, just watch it as a show that, is in the same verse but might not necessarily have anything to sort of alter the characters or storylines we already know. I guess that's definitely one way to take it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, from there we will move into our review for the Shadow of Kyoshi. Like I said before, this specifically is our second of 3 reviews for Shadow of Kyoshi. Last time out we did the first third of the book. Next time out we're going to do the last section. But for today we're doing the middle section. So we're starting with the chapter which is called The Crash. And we're going to finish up with the chapter called Escalation. So where we left off last time was basically Kyoshi has her big political mistake, mistaking like Chaejin for Zoryu as being the Fire Lord, and then just as they seem to be on better terms, things are going better. They go back into the party. They realize that Yoon has showed up, and as we find out very early on in this chapter, he's holding everyone captive. So this is straight away Yoon speaking, because he didn't speak when he appeared at the end of the last book. So he's much more open and vocal this time out. And so given that we already had one of the interludes already, you get a sense for, with the prologue, okay, this is that boy from Makapu Yoon, where he's talking about things like a game. He's speaking quite a lot actually, but you can tell that there is something off about him and the way he's threatening people so heavily. Specifically the way they describe that he basically has implanted everyone's feet into the ground, and like with the amount of people at the party, it's this crazy wide-scale earthbending move that he's actually done here. And he's making a complete show out of things here. He's really playing up the sort of showman persona here of like, the Fire Nation people are so sort of respectful. Like if this was Earth Kingdom people, they'd be freaking out of like, how dare you do this to me, and so on. And he's threatening to, like, if anyone angers him, he'll basically snap people's legs because of the position he has them in. And it's like, okay, this is what we saw when he, like, basically had the tea house collapse at the end of the last book. So what are your thoughts on this kind of early section of this kind of opening chapter here, where we I suppose get Yoon characterized here as the villain at this point?
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting confrontation. Just seeing, what was, a pretty easygoing sort of, fun, mostly fun, type of character sort of, do a complete 180, and to have him, to actually, hear his vocal sort of interaction with Kyoshi and Rangi, and how, Rangi's trying to sort of, stand her ground and sort of, put him in place of, where he used to be. And Yoon is clearly not having it at this point. And, throughout this whole part here, Kyoshi is really just sort of like fumbling with what to do. She doesn't, just starting off, like she wasn't really aware of what she would do if she did have to be, confronted with Yoon. And here we are here, and she's like sort of like not really sure what to do, because she can, we know that everyone is in like serious trouble here. He does, push one of them more into the ground, as, just to sort of show the control that he has. And, you can tell that there's something off here, but it's definitely, and I think this is just something throughout the whole sort of section. And, even the next part of the book, we'll talk about, is just sort of her reluctance to sort of, accept what Yoon actually is.
Yeah, like she sees that he's clearly doing something wrong here and just can't bring herself to really act against him. And they really only get going once they realize, like, what are you here for? And he basically just says, what I want is what you already got, which is justice. And he brings up this idea that, like, oh yeah, I'm happy that Jeonju is gone, but I have a much longer list than that. And who else could, like, theoretically be on my list? And Kyoshi figures out that, oh, Heiron, that he wants revenge against Heiron because she was part of the training that, also doubled down on the idea that he is the Avatar. So Rangi's mother is at risk here, and so there's a big rush through the palace here, because of course Rangi Heiron was kind of separate from everyone else, and they just kind of run through the corridors, and they end up getting to the location first, and Yoon makes a mistake here, and it's just like, I can't believe I made a mistake trying to go after the person I want to kill. But along the way, he found someone else that he wanted to kill, someone else on the list, and that is Liu Beifong. He's basically killed off screen here, and we see him holding his body. And yeah, this makes sense, because they described earlier on that it was a combination of Jeonju and Liu, who together basically were the key two people behind spreading the word to the entire world that Yoon was the Avatar. Their importance in the world got that across to everyone in the nobility that he is the Avatar. We believe him to be the Avatar, so everyone agreed to it. And this is why he has this sort of like legacy as the fake Avatars, because of these two. But yeah, he's been killed here, and then obviously they're trying to defend him from going after Heiron, and this is when, like, they're in the corridor with all the Fire Nation portraits, which we focused on before, with like Cheryu and Zito, and Chancellor Dairin comes in and is like, don't firebend at him, you'll ruin the portraits, because he's obsessed with the history of the Fire Nation. And so this is where Yoon does his big move here as he plots his escape here. He doesn't want to fight every guard in the palace. He rips the pigment out of all of the paintings, because the pigment is like earth based. So he gets the trace amounts of earth from the pigment in the paintings and just rips it all off these super valuable paintings that take a lifetime to make, basically. Destroys all of this history and basically makes this like earth paint bomb and just smashes it into the ground, and it explodes basically like a grenade, and everyone gets hit with shrapnel. Dairin is killed, a few other guards are killed, and Kyoshi is pretty much only saved because she wore her armor. So Yoon leaves after, this, devastating maneuver that no one saw coming, because they were convinced in the middle of the palace he was not near enough to any earth to do anything, but he killed a bunch of people with like the paint on the walls. That's insane. So what are your thoughts on this second section here? Yoon killing more people.
Yeah, I mean, it shows the lengths that he's willing to go to get his vengeance, to get his revenge here. And, we can just see more of his, skilled ability as a earthbender. Even if he is, considered the fake avatar, he's still pretty much, almost unmatched as an earthbender. I mean, even without, there being any elements near him, we know that he has, a pretty, long range sort of like earthbending attack. So I wouldn't have been surprised if, they went some other route of him like pulling earth from some far distance into the area to sort of help him make his escape here. But going the route that they did here, just showing, how willing he was to, destroy the history. It's interesting, to note, and I'm sure they did it on purpose, that he only, destroyed the Avatar paintings. He didn't destroy any of the Fire Lord, paintings. So clearly you can see where his, anger really lies there. But it definitely was a devastating attack here that we haven't seen before. I mean, just the fact that he is able to get the trace amounts of earth from, the painting pigmentation that was used, which I think is definitely a skill in itself, because it's definitely not something, as far as we can tell, that was really sort of like, I guess, thought of in that sort of a way. Like, would have Kyoshi thought of doing the same sort of thing? Or maybe she would have, and probably, might have had, more respect for, what was, around him, where he seems to be, he's just completely unconcerned with, he'll do whatever he needs to do to accomplish his goals here. So, yeah, no, it definitely was a pretty devastating thing to see. And, with Liu Beifong gone and Chancellor Dairon, clearly he's not afraid to take lives at all.
And even just the way he talks to Kyoshi about the whole idea of like, are you're aware that you're going after like Rongi's mother, and he's perfectly fine with it, that like this is what he needs to do. He has in his mind the justification to do it, of like, prices need to be paid basically, because I've been, because of what happened to me, it doesn't matter who I have to take down to make it happen. But we move on to the next chapter, which is called Aftermath, which, as you can expect, is about the aftermath of this near massacre, basically. Like, only a few people have been killed, but there's a lot of injuries, and the main aftermath here is just that, like, one earthbender has come into this party where basically all of the Fire Nation nobility held everyone captive, and the Fire Lord was unable to do anything whatsoever. So of course we deal immediately with just the injuries, and of course we have an amazing healer here. So we see Otuat in action, and Dairon, of course, at this point is sort of still alive, but he took the brunt of the blast here, and he's bleeding out on the ground, and Kyoshi's like, Otuat, please help him. And she just gives him a glance, looks at his injuries, and is just like, nope, he's gone. And she moves on to the people who she actually can treat. And Kyoshi is just like stunned that like a water tribe healer can be so, blunt like that about, no, that person's dying. They're gone. Like there's nothing I can do to save them. There's no point. It would be a waste of time. But she is actually like going after people who are quite seriously injured, just not that level of injured. And this is where we get the debut of her unique bending technique here, which is that she lowers the temperature of someone's body, which slows every process in the entire body down, and she mentions including death. But you have to do this very carefully, because if you overcool them, you'll freeze their body and like further injure them. So you have to have such control that it's literally just the temperature that you bring down, and that you don't bring it down like too much. So she notes that like it's a power, but it's also a precision technique, and that very few benders could actually do something like this. And Kyoshi, of course, sees this and is like, she's already doing her healing training. She needs to be able to do this. So Otuat has her sort of go to work, heal who you can, some of the minor injuries, because Kyoshi can actually heal to a degree. Um, but it's just very, very interesting to see, wow, a brand new sort of healing focused technique. This one, in terms of just, I suppose, trauma type thing of just like, we need to bring someone somewhere to like operate. This can get them a bunch of time. So what were your thoughts on this technique being introduced here?
The technique is pretty cool. I mean, it's like, cryo freezing someone just like on the spot with water bending, or not completely cryo freezing, but getting them close to that level where their body processes actually stops. So it's definitely pretty cool. It has some basis in reality. So I definitely like that they sort of like introduced this technique, and just the fact that you really do need, a really increased amount of skill and precision to actually do this technique. It's not, it's not something that anyone can just sort of learn to do. Although she does mention that she does have the ability to teach people this, and, she can teach people really well if the student has sort of the skill, which is definitely cool to see here. So just the fact that, of course, this is sort of like Kyoshi's thing now, is that, she doesn't want to see anyone that she can at least sort of help to sort of survive here. So, despite, what seems like, Sifu Atuat's almost sort of like flippantness of, sort of who lives and who sort of dies here, she, you clearly see that she definitely does, care about healing people. She's just, more of a realist with, what comes, or who can actually be saved versus who can't be saved here.
Mm-hmm. The next section is basically dealing with the sort of political fallout of like, they initially were interpreting this as like, have the Earth Kingdom sent Yoon to attack the Fire Nation? If so, is war between two full nations on the cards? And this obviously should be something that Zoryu as the Fire Lord is dealing with, but we find out that he has just isolated himself from people here. He's not talking, he's not giving out any orders, which gives Chaejin, the guy who wants to be the Fire Lord, his half brother, once again the opportunity to outshine his brother by he's the one who discusses with a lot of the other officials there and gets across the idea that no, we don't think this is an Earth Kingdom attack. We agree this is one individual. So it shouldn't be, war should not be on the cards. This is not something to go after the Earth Kingdom about. So, Chaejin effectively, negotiates against like a war straight away happening. And we know how the Fire Nation can be when it comes to their honor being defiled. And so that's actually a pretty notable thing here. And he just further makes his brother look terrible by being like, oh, can we go now, Zoryu? And he has to let Chaejin go. There's a nice bit at the end here, though, when like Kyoshi does confront Chaejin and basically acts like she's on his side and tricks him a little bit into sort of speaking a little bit more than he should, where he does reveal like the full extent of his ambitions to a degree, but also just the type of character that he is. That he comes across as being a lot better than Zoryu, but in the end, he also doesn't really have the solutions. He just wants the power. He just wants the position and to, outdo his brother more than anything. And she kind of remembers back to like Lao Ge's teachings of just like with people like this who are just out to cause like trouble. Usually, like in Lao Ge's opinion, like you end people like this. But Kyoshi isn't in the habit of just killing people on a whim. But if it was Lao Ge, this is what he'd do to sort of maintain peace. And he just notes with the idea of like, okay, like everything I've said to you just now, none of it will like work in terms of you trying to convince anyone, because it's just your word against mine. Everyone knows that we're sort of ambitious, so this isn't like anything new. But this is where she sort of sees the exact truth of like who Chaejin is, that he's not actually going to change anything, because most of what's going wrong with Zoryu's time is just that like the crops are failing and stuff like that, just basically unlucky stuff that he can't really do anything about. And Chaejin also basically can't do anything with that. It's just that he's a slightly better leader than Zoryu is, but we also haven't seen Zoryu make any decisions here. but that comes into play. But what are your thoughts on this second section of this chapter with, I suppose, Cheijin sort of being the focus here?
Yeah, I mean, I like that Kiyoshi, despite her not being, some sort of, political genius who knows how to like, make all the right deals and understands, sort of the subtleties of the court, she's, still has, the ability to read people and to understand their sort of true intentions here, which is definitely what she's able to get out of Chae-jin before he sort of, realizes that she's, playing him a bit here. So, I like seeing Kiyoshi, for once, despite everything that's sort of happening to her, be able to at least get a little bit of a one up on someone here and able to sort of discern their true intentions here. And yeah, I mean, Zoro, I mean, him, I don't know, you definitely see that at this point he's definitely, not really ready to be in sort of the leadership position that he actually is. Not that Chae-jin would actually be any better, as we see here. He sort of just thinks that things will work out just because he's better, so everything else will be better, which definitely is not always the case. But for whatever reason, he feels that, and it could just be because of his. I mean, he is slightly older, so he is, I guess, maybe slightly more mature in the way that he sees things, but it definitely doesn't seem like he's going to be able to fix any of the issues, like with any sort of like miracle or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we move into the next chapter, and this is further the aftermath, but more with the characters here of Heiron has to address the fact that Yoon is now coming after her. He's already killed a bunch of people. She's next on his list. How does she deal with that? And literally just at breakfast is just like, yeah, so Yoon wants to kill me, and just immediately gets the conversation started and knows that, like, okay, they need to find him. They have to deal with Yoon in some way. And they just start, talking about, like, okay, here's what we know. Jeonju knows about the spirit, Father Glowworm. It's connected to Karuk in the past. So the question sort of comes up like, Kyoshi, why don't you just ask Karuk? If he knows Glowworm, you just contact Karuk to ask him. And so she has to admit that I can't, I just have never been able to make the connection with him or any other avatar. And so this is when the idea comes up of like, oh, let's go to North Chungling and we'll talk to a former friend of Karuk's who was a fire sage, and he'll know exactly the best ways to teach you spiritually about how to connect with the past avatars. And there's a nice mention here of just like, okay, well, why can't we go to the actual fire sages? And Heiron just notes that they're in the pocket of the Sawon clan. The High Sage is Chae-jin's maternal great uncle. And they mention later on that like they mess around with the politics surrounding who is the head sage. So this is Nyatha who they're talking about here. He is an actual sage, so they sort of trust him because he's actually separate than all of that. Rangi of course brings up her approach here of just that she doesn't like that in a way Heiron and Kyoshi are putting all of their hopes on basically trying to figure things out through spiritual matters, that they're like, oh, let's investigate spiritually what's going on here, when Rangi's kind of like, can we increase security? Like, can we do actual stuff to, help my mother not get killed here? And she's getting very frustrated that she thinks they're going on like a wild spirit chase, as she calls it. And Kyoshi's still like, we have to get the old Yoon back, but Rangi's point is like, did you not see him? That's not Yoon. Like, it might just be that's who he is. And Heiron has to sort of tell Rangi to calm down. And she just points out that like, no, she needs to contact with Karuk. But Rangi actually comes back and is like, no, I won't calm down. How was Yoon even able to do what he did? Like, he was like an assassin basically doing what he did. There's no way he should have been capable of that. And Heiron just admits that like, actually Yoon is a trained killer, and has to reveal the story of how publicly he just did the normal avatar training, but the reason like Sifu Amok was there in the first book and so on was that Yoon was doing all of this like assassination training, the best way to kill people, poisoning, avoiding poisoning and all of that stuff. Yoon does actually know how to kill people, which is why he's not just sort of a talented bender gone rogue, but a talented bender who has assassination training. And that's a huge, huge problem. And this is a big sort of breach of trust between Heyron and Rangi, that she's just found out her mother helped to train one of her friends to be a killer, and now he's gone off the deep end. So just on this first section of the chapter, what are your thoughts on this, then, with them discussing Yoon here?
Yeah, I mean, just the whole idea here, I mean, it's definitely something that for Rangi's character is not something that she would have ever, figured into the equation. I mean, this gets mentioned, in the next chapters and coming over and over again. But, Rangi, despite her sort of fierce attitude, is actually a really kind, person, kind character at heart, versus everyone else is definitely more, I don't want to say more real, but more, I don't know, more, they have, they can see more shades of gray maybe as far as, what needs to be done in certain situations here. So this is definitely a big breach of trust for Rangi and her mother here, as far as, what Heyron actually, let happen to someone that at one point she really sort of cared for. And even though Rangi at this point is, pretty much at this point is like, figuring that, Yoon is almost sort of like unsavable at this point here, just the fact that she's hearing that, this was actually, done with a purpose is almost too much for her.
Mm-hmm. And just right at the end of this section, of course, we get a great moment as Rangi flips the table, but she flips the table like over a balcony on like a high up floor, and like nearly kills someone. Like if the table had hit anyone, it would have really badly injured someone. But this is just a huge outburst from Rangi, and we're not really used to seeing this from her. Like the biggest example from the first book was when she, recklessly went onto the Lei Tai platform and had the fight, and she admitted afterwards that, like, if she hadn't like got back up from that punch as quick as she did, she probably would have been killed. But a lot more of that is happening now, as you see the sort of like stress begin to build with Rangi of like what's happening with Yoon, Kyoshi going down this like spiritual path and having so much faith that there's still hope for Yoon, and all this detail she's hearing about her mother. It's all building and building and building. And so we get a nice little moment here between Heyron and Kyoshi as they just talk about, like, I need you to confirm something first. Kelsong didn't know. We took great pains to conceal such matters from him. He would have confronted the rest of us earlier had he found out. And Kyoshi's response is, and then maybe the rest of you would have killed him sooner too. So Heyron not in the best books here with people right now. So Kyoshi goes to Rangi at this point, and we find out that a large part of why she's really upset at this point is that Kyoshi didn't do anything to move to properly try and stop Yoon back at when the fight was happening. She really didn't aim an attack at him or put her effort into going after him, because she is still ultimately holding back. She can't bring herself to actually fight him, and they have a little bit of an argument here of just like Kyoshi presenting the point of like, did you really expect me to just go in there and within seconds of finding out that Yoon is the villain, me to just like execute him like I did Zhu Ping on? And even Rangi admits that, like, okay, yeah, that's a bit too extreme. And they ultimately come to this sort of like, conclusion at this point that they both do still have like hope for him. It's just that Kyoshi is very much like defensive of him, whereas Rangi is just like, okay, I'll give him a chance, but I'm still not sure. And then the main gist of the rest of the chapter is what the chapter is called, like the ritual is. Heyron then comes up with everyone. She has witnesses here, and she cuts off her top knot. So she, removes her honor basically for everything that's happened, both her involvement with Yoon's training, what she did and did not do with regards to with Kyoshi being the avatar, and also, for letting my former pupil dishonor our nation. Just she cuts it off for reasons relating to Rangi, Kyoshi, and Zoryu, and this is for sort of like multiple reasons. In that now an honorless person, even if she is killed by Yoon, that won't have any impact on the Fire Nation inherently, and it puts sort of the family honor in all on Rangi at this point because she is the pure one. So what are your thoughts on some of this stuff that happens here, like the top knot cut at this point and so on?
Yeah, it definitely was interesting to see how they went about, doing this ritual here, how, she had to have, a second president, Sifu Atuad, and just sort of, Rangi pretty much noticing, immediately once, her mother came with the Fire Lord, that something was sort of off in this sort of situation here. I mean, no, it's just, I guess it really, and Heiron, they make mention of this earlier of her just sort of, realizing that everything that she's done in the past, needs to have, some sort of consequence for it. And even here and coming up soon, we get, reference that she still thinks that this is not quite enough to make up for everything that has been done. And, she makes more plans as far as, how to really sort of capture Yoon and, what lengths that she and Kyoshi might have to go to actually, see things through to the end here. But yeah, the whole sort of, ceremony here, we have seen it, sort of once before, in the original Avatar series. So it's interesting to see it again here with more sort of, I guess, pomp and circumstance behind it as far as, what it really means to be, just sort of to lose your honor in the Fire Nation. And I think, this book in general does a really good job of, I guess, sort of explaining that and, sort of, the hierarchy and how, that makes you interact with people who might have once been at the same station, but now you're sort of below them just because of, this one sort of thing. So definitely, I think, I really enjoyed that part of seeing, I guess, more of the complexities of, sort of the Fire Nation, courts and how that actually works throughout the whole book here.
Yeah, this is her attempting to like make up in a way for just kind of going along with Jeonju in the first book, and like that was sort of her mistake in the first one, was that right up until like towards the end and she was having her doubts, she was just going along with Jeonju regardless of what they were doing, and now she sees this need to make amends for everything. And what's interesting is that the dynamic between Rangi and Heiron changes after she cuts her top knot off, because she goes from always referring to Rangi as like lieutenant by her rank and sort of treating her like an equal to now she very literally is just her mother. And so it starts off and she starts calling her like young lady now, and the dynamic is different, and we learn later that it relates to, of course, like the clan that they're from, and they're perfectionists, and so the reason that they're sort of so at odds with each other is because this is just the way they are in their clan. They both expect each other to be perfect, and so anything that Rangi does wrong, Heiron points out, and now Rangi is seeing all of the flaws within her mother and so on. It's pretty interesting overall. But then we get the last kind of 2 pages here, which is basically, again, Kyoshi and Heiron, some of the most interesting dynamics in this book. And it's basically just that she accepts that, as far as I'm concerned, I don't deserve to escape Yoon's wrath any more than Jeonju deserved to escape yours. My death might actually close the books on this nightmare. An upside I'd accept without hesitation. So this is basically this idea of she's conspiring with Kyoshi here to, like, the next time he comes after me, let him like make the attempt, and that will leave an opening for you to capture him, basically. That this is her plan here, that she will accept her death to, get Yoon out of the way, because she's lost her honor, this is what needs to be done. But a lot of pressure is now on Kyoshi here, because she's being asked to effectively assist her mother, her girlfriend's mother, in like killing herself basically. So it's really heavy stuff here, and this is another like explanation like you were talking about of like the crazy extents that they go to about honor in the Fire Nation, of like now that she's lost it, what she's willing to do to redeem herself to a degree. But what are your thoughts on these last kind of few sections of this chapter?
Yeah, it really is. Would this really sort of count, for everything that she's done wrong in the past? Would this make up for it entirely? And, it's still, even if she does, sort of go through with this, it's still going to leave, a pretty big issue with, the people who are left behind here. But I don't know, it's almost sort of like the honor, even though the honor reflects like your clan and your family, it's almost more so self-interested in that sort of way as well. So sort of at like odds with itself with how they actually sort of do the honor here, which is interesting in itself here, because I mean it involves so many other people in order for her to sort of know what she thinks to become at sort of level here. And you can just see, Kyoshi, she's not really sort of like quite really willing to do this just because of what she means to Rangi. So it's definitely not a good position to be put in by any means.
Mm-hmm. The next chapter is called The Fire Sage. I believe it's like the longest chapter in the book. It's like, compared to most of the chapters, it's like super long.
Yeah.
It's like the equivalent of like 3 or 4 chapters, typical chapters from the book. So quite a lot happens here because we move to our sort of other like main location here. So we head off to Shuhan Island, which is the home island of the Kyoso clan. That's the significant point here. Specifically, the place we're going to is North Chungling, which from Avatar is the place they're in the Runaway, because the description here perfectly fits the overhead view you get of that place in it. It's a fire fountain city, or whatever way you want to call it. The description fits perfectly, basically, because they describe it as like a gambling den place, which fits the whole, scamming aspect of the Runaway episode. The other thing about this place they note is that in the past it was known for being a place where people would often have like actual spiritual experiences, but they've sort of monetized that basically with the way the town is currently, and there's a lot of people who now offer sort of fake spiritual encounters and incidents, basically, which as we get to meet Nyatha here, it's revealed that, oh yeah, the town is built over like a hallucinogenic gas, basically, and if you can harness that, you basically just use that to give people the spiritual experience. And this is coming from someone who's like an actual sage, and in this chapter they reveal is not only like an actual fire sage, but is a Bonte tribe member. So he's actually super spiritual, and he's playing right into the whole show about the spirits going on here. So I really like the way to describe this place, as well as it being like the Kyoso clan's kind of main town. And yeah, Rangi doesn't particularly like it here. So it's like a carnival town and so on. This is not really her style, what she expects from it or anything like that. This is where she also asks, like, oh, Rangi, I've never asked you before, like, what clan are you from? And she says, I'm from the Senaka clan. Their symbol is the stylized whetstone, and it's a teeny tiny little island to the south of the capital, and it doesn't really get included on any maps. And she just notes that the thing about her clan is that it has no resources to speak of, so the clan exports the talent and skills of its members. We're teachers, bodyguards, and soldiers because we have little else to fall back on. If we're not the best at what we do, then we're nothing. And suddenly, just this brief explanation sort of like explains a lot about sort of the way Rangi is, the way Heiran is as well, of like that they're from a place that has nothing, so their talent as an individual is like the key thing that they have, and that's why they're often sort of important in Fire Nation politics, but only with like assisting other people and so on. And there's a nice moment here of just like Kyoshi wishes she could get to go see Rangi's home island, but before that we have to obviously make our way to Nyatha, and we get some fun moments of like the people on the streets trying to sell first Jinpa a lot of stuff because they really respect the air nomads. But then they switch over to Nyatha and start over to Ottawa and start calling her like Water Princess and Queen of the Snow. I think they do a good job at just kind of like getting across the unique dynamic within this town and expanding on what we learned in the Runaway. But what's your thoughts on just the opening section of this chapter?
Yeah, no, I think they definitely get an idea of just sort of this town being very different from the capital of the Fire Nation. Just the whole idea of the people being more out there, more open, not as reserved, which I guess is due to just sort of the nature of the town and sort of what the town is actually selling people. Just sort of the whole idea of having more tourists there, given these sort of quote unquote spiritual awakenings. Just it definitely is a big sort of, I guess, contrast compared to what we've been led to believe of the Fire Nation, which I think is something that, Kyoshi notes a lot in this, just sort of how, some places seem like they're better off than others, and, some places are just as bad as anywhere else in the world. So, that whole sort of comparison, it does, a good point of, I guess, sort of grounding the Fire Nation as not being such a sort of lofty place that everywhere else in the world should aspire to be, which is something that we're generally led to believe. But no, I think it's definitely an interesting dynamic that we're seeing right here in the first part.
Yeah, and it also fits the general dynamic we have here of like the Sawang clan are right now the best clan in terms of like their prosperity. The Kyoso clan are sort of on the downcline at the moment, so it fits that like their main town is like this. So yeah, at this point we then make our way to where Nyatha is, and we get introduced to him. And basically you can tell immediately that there's some tension between Rangi and Nyatha. It's like, okay, they both knew Karuk in the past, but what's going on here? So immediately, like, Rangi and Kyoshi are both like, can we please just get this out in the open? Like, what's the deal between you two? And so Nyatha says it's simple. The headmistress thinks I ruined Karuk, and Heiron says, and Sage Nyatha believes I and the rest of Karuk's companions did. And so we just go on and we just get this sort of discussion about basically just the spiritual thing of like, do you know anything about like Father Glowworm, everything that's happened here? And the first thing he says is basically, the curse strikes again. And he says, the name you bring across my door is some very bad luck. Karuk tangled with many hostile spirits during his avatarhood, and Father Glowworm was one of the worst. He never fully defeated it, and after their battle, it doomed him to suffer catastrophic fortune in the physical world. Anyone told about Father Glowworm would be cursed in the same way. Anyone who even learned of its existence. I believe the intent was to isolate the Avatar from any allies he might call to help him defeat the spirit for good. And he just notes here that, like, oh, you question what a curse is, but people of the Fire Nation are always talking about, like, the spirits, blessing your crops or, like, fisheries and stuff like that. So, in his mind, it's just a sort of similar thing to that. And he notes that, like, Karuk didn't meet a happy end, neither did Jonju, so, as far as I'm aware, it is true. I just think this is really interesting, this whole idea of the curse, and they talked about this in the first chapter of the book, the prologue, with the idea that, like, Yoon introducing himself to Glowworm was almost like signing a contract with him, that they were inherently linked. And we'll obviously cover this when we get to the Karuk backstory as well. But now we find out that, like, oh, spirits having like a curse related to them is kind of true. And I suppose this sort of fits with the idea that, like, I suppose Ko the Face Stealer is sort of a curse as well, that, like, if you show emotion around him, he can steal your face and so on. But yeah, what are your thoughts on just the opening here, introduction with Nyatha, and just the whole idea of, like, each of his companions thinks they were each sort of responsible for kind of ruining him?
Yeah, I mean, it's knowing the whole sort of story and sort of what is actually the truth. It's interesting to see both sides of the perspective here, which from not knowing the other side, it seems sort of justified. So just them having this animosity that has built up over years, and of course with Kuruk's unfortunate early demise due to what actually happened in his backstory, it definitely doesn't sort of help either one of their sort of positions here. And just to see Rangi and Kyoshi sort of see this conflict here, even though they were brought here specifically for Nyathia's actual help here, is just interesting to get that perspective here. But yeah, getting into the more sort of spiritual aspects of things happening, how the spirits have this ability in some form or whatever to actually curse people over time, even if they're not sort of like directly sort of influence them, which like you said, doesn't seem too surprising or too out of the realm of what happens. I mean, we know that they can influence humans to some degree, and possess them, and even kill them if they actually stay in their body over time. And sometimes they do actually do positive things as well. So the fact that they have this sort of long-term effect over the human world doesn't seem too out of the realm of possibility of what we have been led to believe so far, especially if the spirit is strong enough. I think that's probably the key thing to keep in mind here. It's not just sort of like any spirit, and Father Glowworm, with being one of the few that can actually tunnel into the human world, or previously could tunnel into the human world at will. This definitely seems like it would be something on his level here. So no, I think this is definitely interesting to get this sort of perspective of the spirits, and to see how Rangi, despite being with the Avatar and seeing to some level degree some of the sort of more spiritual aspects of the Avatar, isn't quite sort of really believing. She still needs more physical action in order to see how things actually will turn out, versus Heyron, with her experience with the Avatar before, is, despite this not being her most favorite person to interact with, is willing to at least see how this might potentially help the reincarnation of Kuruk.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, right before this was the second half of the chapter kicks off, we get this dynamic where Heyron says to Nyatha, "You fell to your own vices that you infected Kuruk with," and he counters by saying, "I tried to make sure at least some of the emptiness inside him was filled with purpose. You, who spent so many years with him, what did you produce? A good pai show player? Some companions of the Avatar your lot were." And Kyoshi sort of snaps at this, because she's been hearing so much stuff about Kuruk, and almost like excuses being made for him and what happened to him, but she just has no time for Kuruk based on what she's heard. And it's just like, Kuruk was responsible for himself. Now are we going to sort of help the current Avatar, please? And so he just like has you note some of the quick stuff that, like, okay, if there's no obvious like physical deformity, I can't immediately diagnose that it was like spirit possession of some sort. So then she asks, okay, can you teach me to communicate with Kuruk? Or tell me how he fought Glowworm? And he just is forced to admit that, like, okay, like, I was just there with him, and I sort of was his handler during these spirit missions. I didn't confront them myself, so I can't do that. But he says, come back an hour before twilight, and he'll teach her how to communicate with Kuruk. Not through the noxious gas that he has there, but the right way. So that's the setup for a little bit later on. But this is the point at which, like, this chapter is kind of like, it probably should have been split into two chapters, because it's about two very separate things basically at this point. Because at this point, outside of the tent that they're meeting Yada in, members of the Sawang clan arrive in North Chungling, which obviously this is a problem in and of itself, because their island is Mainka Island. What are they doing here on the Kyoso clan island? That straight away is causing tensions. So they're just watching this happen. We have Lady Huazo talking to Sanshur Kyoso, so the two sort of leaders, I guess, of these groups. And we just get that there's so much tension here between the two of them. Huazo, of course, is trying to like antagonize everyone. She notes that, like, oh, I'm just here because I recently bought some property, and he counters with, like, none of our clan would ever sell property to the Sawang clan. And she's just like, oh, then why do I own the salt business down the road and like have a holiday house over here? And so she gets one up on him there, and he just asks, like, oh, why have you arrived here with so many of your guards? Are you asking for a fight, basically? And so they all note that what she's doing here is very clever in that the Sewon clan are in the ascendancy, but they're still just one clan. So they can only sort of counter, basically. They want someone to attack them first, and then they'll counter-attack. And so they'll look like they're in the right, just defending themselves, and that's how they'll gain power, just sort of by being petty. So it looks like things are going to sort of simmer down at this point, and then suddenly someone spits on the ground next to someone else, and this is a huge insult. The fight is about to break out, at which point basically Heiran, Rangi, and everyone realizes we should get involved here to stop this. And so, because Huazo knows Heiran, that basically stops it. And we get the interesting dynamic here where, they're former friends. She's calling her like headmistress, but then the second she notices that, like, oh, her top knot's gone, she goes to be like, I'll never disavow you no matter the circumstances. And it looks like they're about to hug or something like that, but she just pats her on the head like a child, like immediately being like, oh, you're not on my level anymore, just like, go away, you. And it's just this moment where it looks like Rangi is about to be the one who's going to snap at seeing her mother like disrespected like this. But they have averted the first Kyoso clan versus Sewon clan battle here. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this, the shift of this chapter now into more heavily dealing with the tensions between the two clans?
Yeah, the tensions, the politics, the rank, the sort of hierarchy of, sort of social standings, it all sort of comes into play at this point. And, it's interesting to see how this plays out, how Heiran's able to sort of, take this, sort of humiliation, how, the Kelso clan behind her isn't quite, they sort of like, they understand this, but they don't really want to accept it, even though they sort of, they sort of stomach it as well here. So it's definitely, an interesting way that they're choosing to display this here, just sort of, I guess, basically sort of save face and not to start this war. I mean, I think, Kyoshi does come up behind them, after they sort of, have jumped the gun to try to stop this, inadvertent sort of like civil, clan war here, and she has to bend some rocks away without, anyone really sort of noticing. So the tension is definitely very high at this point here, and you can just, you can see how this is going to boil over.
Yeah, I like the description there of just like she basically sends the rocks like into orbit, like is how powerfully she like bends them away. But yeah, what happens from here is that we also get this interesting dynamic where Huazo's niece knows Rangi. They were like former friends back in the academy, so to calm tensions down, they sort of have this like really kind of huggy session here where Kyoshi's kind of like, I didn't know about this, and there's like the almost like slight hint of jealousy there from Kyoshi because they seem to get on really well. They obviously turn that around like almost immediately when they actually talk about it, but we just get Kyoshi talking to the Kyoso clan, and there's just this idea of like, they have such issue with the Sewon clan because they know that their skill is in the way that they talk. He calls them like fork-tongued fiends because they're just trying to like rile them up and so on. But then the Kyoso clan were also at fault for nearly starting the conflict themselves with the rocks. And it's just like there's tensions here because of everything going on, that they support Zoryu, and they are so loyal to him and the whole clan that they're never going to stand by and watch the Sewon clan try and take over. And Heiran just notes, as we sort of cut scenes here, of just like that, I don't think Sanshir's men are going to be the one to start a war. There's someone else I'm worried about. And she's looking over at Rangi, which kind of feels a little bit weird in that, like, oh, but she was just hugging like Colin a second ago. Like, surely she's calmed down a little bit, but no, as we get in the next section when Kyoshi and Rangi talk about this, and she's like, oh, is that one of your friends back from your amazing time back at the academy? And Rangi's like, I think you've got the wrong idea, Kyoshi. Like, I hated my time in the academy. The reason I did so well and got through it so quickly was because I wanted to spend the least amount of time there as possible. That girl Colin, okay, we kind of got on a bit, but she was the one who started most of the rumors about my mother that like affected me throughout all of the time at the academy. That she views Colin as being like the worst of the Sauron, and their signature technique of delivering insults with plausible deniability. And Kyoshi's just kind of like, but it's the Fire Nation, because you not just have resolved it with an Agni Kai? And Rangi just points out that the way they do things, they say it in a way where Agni Kai is never quite justified, or they can talk their way out of it, and that's the skill that no one really is able to counter with the Sauron clan. And we just sort of end the chapter with this incident where the Kyoso clan start to attack some of their own people because they put up Sauron clan symbols to try and draw business, because they can see that there's people from the Sauron clan in their town. So a pretty normal thing, just, they want to sell their stuff. But it's so tense between the clans that even just trying to bring in some business is grounds for like beating one of your own clanmen up in the streets. So they note that as the chapter ends, under their feet North Chungling was priming to explode. And I think the tension was definitely well explored in this chapter. So what are your thoughts on this second half of the chapter with the Huazo Rangi sort of confrontation with the Sauron clan, and everything going on here at the end?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point where you can see that there's not going to be a way to really sort of avoid some sort of conflict at this point. Like everyone has an issue with another person here, even if it's and it seems like a lot of it has been building for a lot of time. So it's nothing here seems like it's new. It's just that it's finally come to the point where it can't really be ignored, and the whole idea that even within their own clan, they're seeing that they're having issues, and even if it is just for business, they're not even willing to let that sort of slip up go. Like, you have to show 100% support for whoever the main part of the clan actually is sort of backing at this time here. So seeing sort of like the microaggressions that the Sauron clan is doing and has been doing, and is their sort of apparently their like signature thing that they always do. It just it really sort of puts things in perspective here, as well as just Rangi in general. I like that throughout this whole book we're seeing a different side of her that we haven't really seen before, like the cracks in her armor sort of being shown through here, which definitely seems to endear her more to Kyoshi more than sort of like push her away, just because she sees that Rangi isn't necessarily perfect, which for her is just fine. She's still gonna be perfect to Kyoshi regardless, but definitely it helps her to have someone with her who isn't maybe necessarily perfect, but still can put her in her own place. So I like that part as well.
Mm-hmm. And next chapter is spiritual exercises. So we cut over to, of course, Kyoshi and Yahda. They're going to try and communicate with Karuk, but he does reflect on his own nation, what's happening here, the tensions. It's not a good sign, though. Fights don't usually break out until later in the festival, once the alcohol starts flowing. I'm sure you have plenty of drunken aggression in the Earth Kingdom, but here, when you've got to avenge every stupid slight upon your name, I tell you, I don't love that part about my country. And he just notes that thankfully Agni Kais probably won't happen, because it's a spiritual offense to burn another person during a holiday like this, and because it's the festival of Zito, there won't be any like Agni Kais, but there will be a lot of tension rising because of that. But anyway, we move on to them hiking up a mountain, basically to go to a place that's spiritual enough to make the connection. There's a little bit of a kind of moment where they just kind of argue with each other over, like, you didn't tell me you had access to a bison. We could have got up there in minutes rather than hiking up. And Kyoshi's just like, I thought the walking was part of the spiritual event. But she's kind of like, if Karuk doesn't work out, can you show me how to connect with Yang Chen? And there's like, I don't think Yang Chen will be as much help as you think. And she's like, no, she's the perfect avatar. But here he actually reveals he knows a lot about how this works. To connect to a past avatar, you have to go through it in the order of the chain. You have to go through Karuk first to get to anyone else. And Kyoshi gets frustrated by this and is like, great, so on top of everything else, Karuk's a wall keeping me from my potential. And I like that Nyatha snaps back at her here and it's just like, he's what? I swear, I would have known you were his reincarnation from the start and saved the Earth Kingdom a lot of trouble had they brought you before me. You two are exactly alike. And Kyoshi's super upset at this, like she hates being compared to Karuk. And he just, counters her and says, you both idolize Yang Chen to a fault. You're both stubborn as rocks when it comes to what you want, and neither of you have any control over your emotions. Mark my word, you're going to botch up someday as bad as he did because of your personal feelings. And they're just kind of really at odds with each other here, but they do eventually settle down. But what are your thoughts on this just initial section here of Nyatha reflecting on everything and then the little argument here between the two of them?
Yeah, I don't know, I really like his character as far as being sort of like the older sage who's not necessarily perfect, but does still have like a lot of input and a lot of sort of like wisdom to be gained. I think you even see this more so, coming up after the next section we'll talk about. But yeah, there's definitely, I mean, he can, he can see things through. Like he has like the experience in the years, and he knows, he knows a lot more than he's sort of letting on. Which I don't know, maybe if Kyoshi was paying a bit more attention, she might have been able to sort of realize that. But you can definitely tell her sort of like her obsession with sort of hating Kuruk and, like he mentioned, idolizing Yang Chen, definitely, inhibits her from seeing the truth of the situation here. But I like that they are at least eventually able to come to some sort of agreement here with what they're actually sort of going for. But no, it definitely is interesting just to see him, counter Kyoshi with pretty much everything that she's saying, and them just sort of having this sort of back and forth here. Like, I mean, they haven't really known each other, so there's not really, a huge amount of trust that, you would think that they would have already. But, it's interesting seeing her comparison with him versus sort of Lao Gi and sort of how that sort of dynamic turned out in the end.
Yeah, I like Nyatha a lot because you don't expect like an actual like deeply spiritual man like him from like the Bonte tribe to be so almost like almost the way he approaches things is so kind of like to the point. Like the way he talks about actual spiritual matters is just like, oh yeah, it'll work like this, and this, and there's none of that like pomp and circumstance about like, no, spiritually it has to be done like this. So he's just like, yeah, we'll take the bison up rather than just hiking up the mountain and so on. And then the fact that he is willing to just completely go at Kyoshi for hating Karuk for like no reason, and it also points out that like Karuk is the avatar she needs to speak to. He's the one who knows Glowworm, and then the fact that they are so similar is another reason why he would actually be helpful to get advice from, which is basically the dynamic we get to when we get the sort of truth about Karuk and Yang Chen revealed later on in the book. But he goes on and explains the basically 3 ways an avatar can communicate with their past lives. The first one is just a vision, that you will be shown something, you won't be able to interact with it, it'll just, whatever happens, happens. You'll get, there's no communication back or forth, it's just you are shown something. The second way is that you'll be possessed by the spirit of another avatar. And they will communicate with me, and then I'll relay it to you afterwards. This is the Roku taking over Aang in 108, as well as to talk to Zhang, and we also saw it in Avatar Day when Kyoshi appeared to say that she killed Shin the Conqueror. So we've only seen that one very, very rarely, but I like that they bring it up here, that it's one of the methods. It's not as used as much as you think. And then the last way is to actually, like go into the spirit world and directly talk to, the spirit of one of the past lives. It's the most difficult one, but it's also the one most commonly referred to as the communication with your past lives, because it's an actual communication. So how does he actually go about connecting Kyoshi with Karuk? So he gets a small flame in his hand and basically has her look at the flame, and he just basically starts this chant. It's one flame and it's many, it changes with every moment. No fire is ever the same fire, no avatar is ever the same person. You and the flame change with every moment, every generation. You are one flame and you are many. One in many, you are the flame. One out of many, one and the many. And she just starts kind of going along with this, and then all of a sudden, it happens. And in this case, she's going to get a vision here. So, yeah, I suppose just what were your thoughts here on just from an actual spiritual character here, just getting the explanation of like, here are all the different ways you can talk to a past life.
Yeah, I really liked that breakdown. I mean, it was, straightforward. You could understand it. It wasn't any sort of like, wishy-washy sort of, way of, this may work or that may work. It was just, these are the ways that, so far as we know, it has been, led to actually work. And, these are the ways that you have to sort of consider getting your information, and, which way that works for you is the way that'll actually work. So, I like, like we've mentioned, he's not very sort of a roundabout type character, despite being very sort of spiritual. He, as far as he understands and can tell things, he will tell them sort of directly, which I think is probably works, a lot better for Kyoshi as a character, rather than sort of going the roundabout way that she has experienced before. But yeah, no, I think it definitely works, and the way that he does actually get her into the actual sort of mentality for this is pretty cool.
Yeah, like you get the impression if this was like a Guru Patik and it was just like, oh, let's open up all 7 of your chakras before we do this, she probably would have like punched him or something like that. She appreciates him just getting straight down to business. But yeah, the next chapter is called The Message, and this is like the first of 2 chapters that focus on Karuk's backstory. They're not back-to-back chapters. We have to wait for the second half of the Karuk backstory until much later on in the book. But this section is still very good, even if it's not like, I think, what everyone was waiting for. It still has a lot to it that's very, very interesting, just because before these books, like, we didn't know that much else about Karuk, and so even learning about him in the start of his journey was actually really nice to get. So we start off with this, it's just a vision here, so there's no communicating with it. It's just basically, this is stuff that happened to Karuk. So we find out him at the banquet when he's revealed as the Avatar, so he's only just found out. They briefly go over like a potential idea of like, oh, is this how the Water Tribe, the Northern Water Tribe, goes about discovering its avatars? He notes that he was surprised when he made this glowing crystal rise into the air under his command, and that the Northern Sages were just like, after this, oh yeah, try to bend the other elements, we think you can. And he was able to do it, so highlighting his talent straight away of just that the second they realize it's probably him, he could, bend the other elements as needed. And yeah, he wished he had known like more about, the exact methods of like how they found out he was the Avatar, but he was the Avatar. They go through his training here, and the probably most interesting thing here is just his philosophy on the elements, given that he is the Avatar, capable of bending 4 elements. He was frustrated during his earthbending training, when his teacher got mad at him for trying to kind of incorporate his waterbending style into his earthbending, and was more about, no, do it the earthbending way. And so he doesn't like this idea that, like, as the Avatar, his teachers sort of expect him to be 4 separate people and to constantly have to sort of switch between them. That when he's waterbending, he has to do everything the waterbender way. When he's earthbending, he has to do everything the earthbender way. He much prefers this idea of being able to have this sort of blended style where he can bend all 4 of them. Why not mix and match them together to make this most unique style as possible? Because he notes that like this strain of constantly having to be this many people might tear someone apart, and the only person in the group of people kind of helping the Avatar that like agrees with him is Jonju, who he meets when he's a teenager here, and so he's the first one to meet him, and they bond over this. They start playing Pai Sho together. Karuk is all about freedom, and he kind of makes a decision after this point to, okay, I'll go along with what my teachers are saying, and I'll get my freedom to do what I want at the end. Because at the end, I'll probably be given a Sky Bison, and I'll be able to do whatever I want. Then I can mix and match my style and do what I want to do. but I'll be good until then, so they won't, give out to me. But they try and steal a sky bison for a joyride, and this is when they meet Kelsong, who of course steps in to stop them from stealing it. But he's basically assigned to be with them like 24/7, so he becomes part of the group initially just as like a guard almost for them, but they do become friends eventually. And then Heiron joins later, but it was initially meant to be an older man from her tribe, but she was sent instead. And then Karuk worked some kind of thing behind the backs of everyone to make sure that Heiron was kept on board in the team. And we get here that he admitted to her straight away that he liked her, and she like refused him publicly, but then in private did say that like maybe off duty something can happen between us. So I like the development of that, and the core here as we come to an end is just that everything is going well for Karuk, like up to about like the halfway point of his life. That he has this amazing group of friends who all have this amazing potential, and this is confirmed to him when Kelsong meditates into the spirit world, and the elders of the air nomads sort of like are arguing with him over what the spirit world actually is, even though Kelsong's the one that's gone there. And so he asks Kelsong to help him meditate into the spirit world, and he just notes that his friends, he loved them so much, life was good, it was simply good, and the world was a wonderful place, as Kyoshi comes out of the vision. So it's just presenting, I suppose, Karuk's philosophy before anything particularly bad goes wrong in his life, how he met the different people, and as well as that we get this idea that Kyoshi has a very emotional response to seeing Kelsong in this vision, because this is her father figure, and it hurts her seeing him like meet up with the person who's going to one day kill him, and just knowing how badly things are going to go between the companions going forward. I really like that dynamic here. But what are your thoughts on this like first half of the Karuk backstory here?
Yeah, that dynamic is definitely very apparent throughout this whole part here. Just how in turmoil Kyoshi is over seeing Kelsang and Jeonju, and how it seemed like they actually, even if it was over Karuk sort of being turned down by Heiron initially, it seemed like they had actual bond here. Like there was, a true friendship between, these companions of the Avatar, and, with her knowledge of the future and what actually turns out, it definitely is too much for her to sort of handle at this time now. And it really puts her in just agonizing pain basically to see all this. But the whole story itself, I think, is definitely it's a nice story. I think it fits in the mode of what we've come to know as far as like how the Avatar sort of meets up with his companions, and how they go on adventures together. Sometimes it doesn't seem like they would necessarily be the ones that get along with each other, but some way somehow things for the most part actually turn out all the better. So I think the story in itself, despite how it actually turns out in the end, was definitely a nice way to actually get this sort of history of Kirk that we've never had before until now.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I like is that when they finally get together as a group, he already is like a master of the four elements, but he specifically asks them for like more individual training based on like their approach to bending, which I think it was nice to get, because like we typically like interpreted like what we knew before was that he would like challenge people in the streets to like fights of bending to show off. But now you have more of the interpretation that like no he just liked to learn from anyone regardless of like who they were. If they could offer him anything, he would challenge them, experience it, to learn it. And I think that's shown by the fact that he arguably is a more talented bender than everyone else on his team, but he still wants to learn from Jeonju, learn from Kelsang, learn from Heiron, everything that they have to offer. And I like the Pai Sho dynamic as well, because that was the big thing from the first book we find out, was that he was an expert at Pai Sho. But they explain that like The distinction between the best Paisho grandmasters and those journeymen who were only mediocre was that the true geniuses simply played more games than their lower ranked counterparts did. They never stopped learning, and that's his approach to his bending, and that's why he is so powerful by the time the conflicts actually come up in his life. And so he almost was like, destined to be the Avatar during this era where the best fighter was kind of needed in a way. But yeah, afterwards she comes out of this, she's like sweating because she's just like seen something so kind of crazy of just like a vision of Karuk. She learns a bit more about him, but she more interprets it as just like, oh, Karuk had a very easy life compared to me early on. But she also has to accept that like he was close friends with her father figure and just everything that happened. And this is where like it gets into the idea of like, okay, can we try anything else to communicate? But he's like, no, pack it up, we're done here. And he just knows that this is your limit. You might be good at meditation, but you will never talk to Karuk or any of your other predecessors in the Avatar cycle if you cling to your resentments this hard. Karuk's flaws aren't keeping you from what you want, yours are. You'll have to find another way to rescue your boy from Father Glowworm's clutches. And so, yeah, he does note that like, you are very good at meditating. Like, have you done this before? And this is obviously the Lao Ge connection. She doesn't explain that like it specifically was him, but she does say that you're not the first old man I meditated with. And he's just like, oh yeah, well, it was really good. Like, I could feel the veil between worlds thinning around your shoulders. Like that he was super impressed by just how spiritual she is, kind of highlighting that it is truly her feelings for Karuk that are holding things back here. She's absolutely spiritual enough to make the connection right now, but just because of how she feels about him, it's stopping that. But yeah, what are your thoughts just on this like final dynamic here between Kyoshi and Nyatha?
Yeah, I mean, she has the skills, but she's, there's other hurdles that she has to overcome in order to fully realize her potential as, I guess, the spiritual side of being an avatar. So it's definitely, obviously a work in progress, and something that she really needs to come to terms with. She's just not ready yet to see that, and Nyathra he's trying to sort of tell her that, but she's not really ready to hear it at all.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, the final thing is just that as they go outside, they notice kind of like written in like basically dead melon yams in the field is the message, "Hail Fire Lord Cheijin." And obviously this is in a Kyoso clan field, so this is going to incite violence, because not only does it say hail like this guy from the Sauwan clan as the Fire Lord, but it was done by destroying a bunch of crops of the Kyoso clan in a time when the crops aren't doing so well, so it's like a double kind of whammy what's going on here. But next chapter is Interlude Survival. So we go back to the backstory for Yoon here. This basically is like immediately after the prologue, so there's been quite a bit of the book between the last time and this one. But yeah, so we pick up immediately where it left off, which was that Glowworm was going to like consume, he was going to like eat Yoon to replenish his strength here. And Yoon is kind of ready to give up, but almost just as a reflex, he does a typical earthbending move, the sky-piercing fist, and the earth moves. So he realizes at this point, like, oh, I can bend in the spirit world. I didn't realize that. And he has this full-on duel that, like, he doesn't remember how long it was because of the time in the spirit world, but, like, they sort of imply, like, 3 days and 3 nights they fought each other. And I like the explanation of this, which is just that, like, as he damages Glowworm shrinks, as we know it works with spirits like that. Like, you sort of blow a hole in them and they just sort of shrink down to sort of fill that hole, but they're still whole. They can't really, like, a spirit can't, like, properly, like, lose a limb. They just overall kind of get diminished. But with Yoon, he is taking injuries here, so he has to use his, like, assassination training about the correct way to fight, to kill and stay in the fight, and he takes his injuries in very strategic points and avoids taking injury anywhere else. And he just wants to know, like, okay, how do I stack up against Karuk? You fought against Karuk before. I've been told I've been just as good. I'm just as good as him as at earthbending. But Glowworm's just like, you presumptuous little stain. If Avatar Karuk hadn't weakened me all those years ago, I would have finished you in an instant. And so they get to talking here, and Yoon gets more and more confident and kind of wants to make a deal with him. And so Glowworm is actually wanting to make a deal with him. So he says, I can grant you some of my power. You'll be able to create a passage between the world of humans and spirits. In return, you would bring people to me. Not many. I don't want to become well known. And he notes that, like, oh yeah, I just passed through you to make this happen. I'd imbue some of my energy to you by just doing it that way. And he notes, you might notice some changes to your physical nature as a result, but it's no issues. If anything, you'd become stronger. So he accepts this, and this is where Yoon completely turns the tables on Glowworm. As Glowworm kind of prepares himself to just like pass through Yoon very powerfully, Yoon just does a really big earthbending move. He uses like everything he has left and just completely takes the earth out from underneath Glowworm as he's sort of socketed himself in a tree. And so Glowworm just is like not connected to anything anymore. And so Yoon crushes him with earth to the point where he shrinks down, to the point where he can fit in his hand. And then Yoon eats Glowworm, and they just end with the line, Yoon swallowed his mouthful and let the change overcome him. He'd never been a picky eater. So just this crazy turn of events here where Kyoshi, you're kind of on the Kyoshi path of things where you think like, oh, are they going for like his anger is being like enhanced by Glowworm, that like Glowworm is to a degree part of his actions? But no, Yoon has eaten Glowworm here, and while you're not entirely sure exactly how this exactly is going to play out, it is this, you know, different way that the sort of spirit kind of possession thing has worked. It's backwards this time. Glowworm was planning to eat Yoon, but now Yoon has actually eaten him. We've never seen this before. But in general, I really like this chapter. Like this kind of confirms to us that like, oh no, Yoon is in control. Like Kyoshi's wrong here. Like this is him 100%. We just don't have the full, you know, picture just yet. But really, really interesting one. You know, Yoon versus a powerful spirit like Glowworm. It shows his power level even before eating Glowworm, and then we know what he's like afterwards. It's a very interesting chapter overall. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I mean the power that Yoon has, even if Father Glowworm is in sort of like a weakened state, it definitely wasn't, you know, such an easy battle to be had. So you can definitely see, you know, the toil that it took on both of them here. So I think that's definitely interesting. The whole idea of Yoon sort of consuming Father Glowworm, sort of the reverse of what we're normally used to seeing here, and to see, you know, how it affects him overall later on, I think is definitely interesting, because like you said, it's not something that we've ever seen before, because it just, you know, there wouldn't really be a reason for that to sort of happen. But here we actually have a reason for that to happen, and we can just see that, you know, like you mentioned, Yoon is in, as far as we know, full control of his actions here. He's just been sort of enhanced in this other sort of way, which is probably why we don't see sort of like the normal sort of possession, or, you know, being flown through or imbued with, you know, the spirit sort of like essence as we are normally used to sort of seeing from what we've past experience. So yeah, I think it's definitely a very cool way that they, you know, decided to do this. That isn't, you know, what I think most people were expecting.
Yeah, and especially with the way the end fight goes, I definitely interpret this as Yoon's like power level like goes through the roof here after this, because I've seen some people make the point of just like, oh no, Glowworm just gives him the ability to tunnel through worlds, and it's just his normal power level to do what he does, and I just think that's kind of crazy given the final fight. Is that your interpretation as well, that like Yoon is only able to do what he does in like later chapters because he ate Glowworm?
Yeah, that's what I
Mm.
would think. I mean, I think I made a note of that somewhere in my notes, but just the fact that he's able to be on par with Kyoshi,
Mm.
and they're both, considerably strong sort of earthbenders, but they both have, sort of like extra sort of enhancements on their ability, even to begin with, but even with, Kyoshi actually being the avatar and Yoon sort of consuming Father Glowworm, I wouldn't see any reason for, without, in addition to whatever the specific, special traits that Father Glowworm has,
Mm.
there would be some, general sort of enhancements in general. Now, to what degree those actually are, like, is it more this way versus more when you merge with each other and you're both sort of willing versus, if Father Glowworm just consumed Yoon, would he, I don't know which method require or which method means you get more power than less power. I think that would be interesting to sort of, figure that out. But it definitely seems like, there's always, even if it's just, the quickest, sort of like fly through, there's some enhancement. The real question is just sort of how overall, how long term effect does that enhancement? Like sometimes it's like a second, as we saw when, Juan first was being, flown through with Rama versus, anyone else who's had like extended period of time. And sometimes it's not actually like a full on power like in beginnings when the spirits went through. It's just like sort of the body change, but we didn't see him be able to like jump 50 feet in the air or anything
Mm.
like that. Not that we know of or anything like that. But there's some change in whatever those attributes are. Even in Korra with the eagle arm, and there's a whole bunch of different examples of that we can see.
Yeah, because I definitely see this as being like somewhere that's like it's obviously not like Yoon is like a second type of avatar thing, just because he's sort of connected with a spirit now. I don't think it's that power level, but
Yeah.
it's close enough, I think, to that. And the reason I definitely say that there is a shift in his power level is just because they literally describe it in this chapter that like he does his tidal act of earthbending to get the ground out from underneath Glowworm, and they note that Kyoshi could have done it easily, but the effort of washing away the topsoil had almost killed him. And then in like the final fight, like I think he basically does like Kyoshi's like bedrock move from the iceberg, but through the whole mansion at the end of the book. And I don't think Yoon before Glowworm would have been able to do anything like that. And he just seems to be able to just directly power counter like Kyoshi, who I kind of do view as being like a sort of special bender with like enhanced power basically, and not just like a boomy kind of type power level type thing. She seems just like beyond that, and she has like the drawback of having very little precision without the fans and so on. Um, but yeah, really, really surprising chapter here. But we'll move on. So the next chapter is Resignation. So of course Kyoshi and Nyahata return down to the village, and of course everyone has seen the message in the field. And so Sanshiro Kyoso, Lady Huazo are at each other's throats here. A fight is once again about to break out. And there's still the sort of thing of like no one's committing to like delivering the first strike, but it's just on the verge of happening. Um, and then Rangi basically goes up to Colin and is just like, "Can you please stop this?" And she just Colin just says, "Oh, Rangi, my dear friend, of course the daughter of a shorn, honorless animal would resort to begging." And Rangi is actually the one to start the first battle here as she punches Colin in the face. And so, as Heiron predicted, Rangi would be the one to actually like set things off. And so, yeah, pretty much it just descends into a melee here in the streets. Kyoso clan versus Sowon clan, and Kyoshi's group is sort of involved in this as well. The key thing, of course, here is that Rangi and Colin do actually fight here, and Rangi like absolutely KOs Colin here. It's a really cool move as she just like kind of she walks away from her and then does this jet stepping propelled like knee straight to the head that just absolutely KOs Colin. But then more than that, like Rangi like gets on top of like this unconscious girl and is like going to like beat her into the ground until Kyoshi stops her. So like I like seeing kind of like this moment of like Rangi losing control, whereas like typically it would be like Kyoshi almost the one more losing control. And this time it's like a role reversal here, which I do actually quite like. I did also want to ask you a question about like how you interpreted this thing. I thought reading it again, I was kind of like, what way are we meant to view this? But then she remembered skilled firebenders could do extreme damage from the concussive force of their bending alone. Each
Yeah.
time Rangi and Colleen rammed a knee
Yeah.
into each other's ribs or aimed an elbow at their opponent's temple, they let out a shockwave that rattled Kyoshi's teeth. And they sort of clarify here that none of them are doing proper firebending because it would be a spiritual offense to do that. And it's kind of unclear about like, so they are, but they're not bending, or is this just a kind of odd way of saying that they're using their sort of bending style, but as like a direct martial arts style in terms of like physical to physical combat, and that skilled firebenders strikes to do like a fire punch, the punch is powerful. Is that what they're saying, or are they saying that there's some other effect of like when you do bending but don't ignite the fire bending, it's like a concussive blast? What's your interpretation of that? Because it's kind of a weird one for me.
Yeah, no, it definitely, I mean, the way to describe it is sort of like odd in itself. I mean, I don't know, we've seen, firebenders be able to sort of like, heat things without, necessarily shooting the fire from their hands. So the whole idea of them having some sort of way of, adding, more heat or more, I guess, sort of like energy to their limbs doesn't, that doesn't seem too out of the realm of possibility from what we've seen before. I think the interesting part is, how is it being sort of like propelled? Because, there's no sort of like, where's the force coming behind, said attack? Like when Rangi does sort of like the jet setting, obviously there's some sort of, force pushing her, through the air in order to actually do those moves. So that sort of makes sense. The whole idea of them sort of creating sort of like, basically it sounds like they're creating like mini explosions when they come into contact with each other, which from what we've seen doesn't seem to be too far out there. I mean, we've seen like, Zuko, sort of like heat things up with his hands without, shooting fires. So, I mean, I think for me that sounds like a cool sort of way of, them sort of like doing, coming into contact, coming to blows without actually, doing like your standard sort of like, fire bending, pointing out your fists and thrusting, and then the fire sort of coming out and everything like that. I mean, I think it also shows like a lot of restraint on the people in general. Just the fact that they're having, this huge sort of brawl, but no one, or at least no one in this sort of current vicinity is actually using, real sort of fire bending, which I don't know, it makes me believe that like almost all the people there are firebending, so that's like a huge like restraint that they have, on themselves. Because like, how do you not like easily just let out a quick little flame or something like that? Or I guess maybe just the idea that they know if they do it, the whole area might go up in flames. But just doing what they're doing, like I can't see how that wouldn't, if there is any sort of like gas geyser or whatever, how that wouldn't cause some issues, as we do see that there are, other places where people are doing it. But yeah, I mean, that's how I was sort of taking that sort of fight, as far as like the concussive blast that they're able to put through each other just from, contact alone.
Yeah, like the only thing I could really think of was is it I think it's the storm when Zuko and Lieutenant G sort of square up to each other. They like put their hands up next to each other, and it's almost like sparking. They're not even
Yeah,
doing anything, and it's just like almost creating a flame. And like, I guess in more direct,
yeah, the friction
yeah,
and
I guess
everything.
more just direct fighting, they're like heating their limbs up, and that adds like extra like kinetic force to their attacks. I guess, because like it's kind of like, is this meant to be kind of like some weird sort of like chi blocking, or maybe not as like accurate as that, but just like you you project your chi as you impact someone else, and it sort of is meant to like do something to them. Um, it's interesting. It's another kind of a little bit vague. It doesn't isn't fully explained, but it's still interesting to note. Um, but yeah, this is all actually just a distraction as they kind of realize that, oh, we've left Heiron alone back at where we're staying, and so when they get there, Yoon is there with his next assassination attempt against Heiron. And this time he just straight up goes for it. He has this kind of dagger of earth and just sinks it straight into Heiron's throat. Like, when I first read this, like without knowing what happens next, I'm like, oh, they've killed off Heiron, like dagger to the throat, like that's a serious injury. Um, so I was convinced that like the next chapter was like Heiron's going to die and like we'll get her final words. It doesn't quite go that way, but it's still a shocking moment because it hasn't felt like that long in the book since like Yoon's last appearance. But what are your thoughts on this sudden turn of events that like we set up the tensions in the town between the clans, we ignite it, they're at odds with each other, and then all of a sudden we need to forget this and go back to Heiron. What are your thoughts on how this chapter ends?
Yeah, I mean, they did a good job on the whole distraction aspect of, this huge battle is really just to sort of hide, Yoon's true goal here of, taking out Heiron. And it definitely, I mean, we know that there has been, some sort of time has passed. Like, he didn't just sort of like immediately sort of go for it. We know that they're sort of at the pie show table. We can see that clearly he's, overpowered Heiron in whatever sort of moves. I think he says like 15 moves or whatever the moves to his actual win. So he's already predicted that he's actually going to win the pie show match. So it's not like they actually had a full match or anything like that. But as soon as Kyoshi's there, he's able to sort of just come to the conclusion that this is when he's going to end Heiron's life. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward, pretty brutal. I mean, I think this is really where we're sort of, understanding truly what he's trying to do, and that this is all, his own doing. There isn't, any sort of influence to his motives at this point other than what he thinks is right to do.
Mm-hmm. And again, on the sort of power level point, the fact that Kyoshi just can't even sort of like equal Yoon's the strength of his like earthbending grip here. That like she tries to oppose him, stabbing her, but he can't, which was similar to the whole incident with Jeonju and her in the tea house, that he just came straight in and was just like, yep, I'll just grab this rock that you two are fighting over. That to me is like the big example of it. And the like with water bending, like the big power level thing seems to be like your blood bending grip, and here they also imply like, oh, earth bending grip, just the power that you have control over whatever piece of earth you're bending, and he can just burst through Kyoshi's power, which is obviously super powerful in the first place. The next chapter is called Weakness. So we find out that like, oh, Heiron isn't just like dead here. She's obviously stabbed in the throat, but she uses the last ounce of strength here to pull Yoon in really close, which makes the dagger go even deeper. But because she's brought him in so close, she firebends this really powerful ball of fire in her hands, and she does manage to injure Yoon's shoulder here. She doesn't deliver like a lethal blow or anything like that, but she does actually properly injure him with a powerful attack here. And so the question now is, Heiron has succeeded with the plan that she made with Kyoshi before. She's created this opening. Now Kyoshi should be able to face an injured Yoon and do something against him. But she decides here that no, she's going to prioritize saving Heiron over going after Yoon. And the idea is like that this is correct, this is right, because she wasn't like super fully on board with the plan. But it is also, she's taking this opportunity as another excuse to not have to go after Yoon, because she still is conflicted about how she feels about that whole situation. So she has to get Heiron to Ottawat, and we pretty much cut there straight away of like, okay, Heiron's going to be okay, Ottawat has healed her, but it's still going to take a while for the recovery. And the issue here now for Kyoshi is that she has angered both of the Seinaka women here. So Heiron and Rangi are both super upset at her. Rangi for, of course, helping in this like crazy attempt to get her mother killed, and Heiron because the plan was that you go after Yoon. So she has to accept the kind of verbal abuse from sort of both of these at this point. And notably, like Rangi, like it's borderline like a breakup in a way between Rangi and Kyoshi. You think it is. Don't apologize to me. There's no need, because from this point on, I'm nothing to you. Do you hear me, Avatar Kyoshi? Nothing. And they of course, note the idea that her specifically calling her Avatar Kyoshi and not just Kyoshi, and then the significance of the word nothing for someone from the Seinaka clan is also kind of important. So it really gets across that like Rangi is really upset about this. But I like that you get more of the dynamic between Heiran and Kyoshi here of just like she has to write to her on like a chalkboard and be like, stop panicking, she's not leaving you, she's angry at you, but it will blow over eventually. It usually takes her, like a week to forgive me. And then very quickly, like a few minutes later, Rangi does appear back up the stairs, shows a bowl of food into Kyoshi's hands and leaves, and it's just like, eat that. And it's just like, oh wow, that was really quick. Like she really likes you. So it's just this really kind of nice moment here between the two of them. And especially when you have Heiran acknowledging stuff like, my daughter loves you, which means you are also my daughter. For better or for worse, you are part of our family. Now eat before it gets cold. So she went in expecting like this terrible incident, but she comes out of it feeling like kind of in a way better about things, like that they've forgiven her. So I know I really like this chapter overall, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think this chapter is pretty good. I mean, I think definitely seeing the dynamic between Hiran and Kyoshi definitely gets a lot of points across. I mean, Heiran is obviously visibly injured from everything has happened before, and she's you can tell that she's slightly disappointed in what Kyoshi wasn't able to do, but she also seems to understand a reason behind her sort of actions here. So I don't know, I like that they have that sort of like understanding here, and the whole idea of Heiran sort of, saying that, she knows her daughter better than Kyoshi does, and sort of, explaining the whole idea of how, how eventually she will sort of come back and forgive her and how quick it happens. And, it really seems like a moment where she's really sort of like, this is like the real moment where she sort of like accepts Kyoshi into her family. So I think it's despite, the craziness of everything that's going on and the turmoil and, just sort of Yoon trying to assassinate her, over and over again, it's like a one nice moment between, everything that has happened that is really, really sort of bad. So even how Kyoshi responds to sort of like the forgiveness of Rangi at the end, I think is a nice touching moment. Something that we don't really see that often throughout most of the book with everything that's going on.
And then the key bit right on the last few pages is that Kyoshi makes her sort of a big move at this point. She figures out that, okay, Yoon is working on behalf of the Sawan, and the reasoning behind that is because everything he's done has made Zoryu look worse and made the Sawan clan, has kind of given them an opening. The other thing is that the crop riding in the melon yams, only he would be sort of detailed enough to write that message so clearly as he did, and obviously there's a bit of a speculation on that side of things. So Heiran doesn't fully agree with it, but it seems like it fits everything going on here, and that like, oh yeah, he has been getting involved in this, and it seems to fit. There's nothing that like obviously directly counteracts this whole point of view, in that it has been very one-sided on his part, in making Zoryu look terrible. But is she overreaching here? And that's the whole dynamic going into the next chapter, which is the last one we're doing for this podcast. And so this is where Kyoshi makes the decision to do something rash. She knows she has to do something here to stop the conflict from actually happening, and she thinks that now that she's sort of figured out that Yoon is maybe involved, that this is what she can use to take advantage as much as she needs to. And basically she makes the decision to kidnap Lady Huazo and Cheijin and force them to admit that they are working with Yoon. And if this happens, it will remove like basically all of the Sawan clan's honor. They'll be completely taken out of the picture because everyone will realize that they hired like someone from the Earth Kingdom to cause havoc in the Fire Nation, and so they will have dishonored the entire Fire Nation, not just like a clan dispute, and it would completely like isolate them as being this like traitorous clan. That's her hope, is that, you know, this is the way things will work basically. And so the interesting thing about this is that this is obviously Kyoshi reaching, and as she takes Wazo just goes along with it and just makes sure to like to everyone around her just kind of get across the idea that, look at what the Fire Lord and the Avatar are doing. Look, they're kidnapping me in the middle of the open. Let everyone know that this is what's happening, basically. That if Kyoshi isn't right here, this is going to go terribly. So I like the setup there. And again, how many times has Kyoshi been asked this in the book? Do you play Paisho, my dear? And it's just like, yep, I thought so. One of the first lessons a player learns is to never interrupt your opponent when she's in the middle of making a mistake. So Huazo is ready to take advantage of this. But as she leaves, and like Jinpa is involved in this as well, taking Huazo away as they go off to get like Cheijin, like Rangi arrives back on the scene here, and Kyoshi is forced to bend Rangi into the ground so that Rangi doesn't like physically try to stop her. So just as things were looking better for their dynamic, she's now done something even kind of worse by like going way overboard. Something that Rangi couldn't do. She hasn't told Rangi about this and has like physically earthbound her into the ground to stop her. So Escalation is the perfect name for this chapter with everything that happens. So I do, you know, really appreciate everything going on here. But yeah, what were your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, I mean, this is, after, Kyoshi comes to her, at least current sort of conclusion of Yoon sort of working with the Saiwan clan and sort of how, how this can actually benefit them if that is actually truly the case here. Seeing the lengths that Kyoshi is going to take here, it definitely puts into perspective of what she's willing to do. And I think I liked sort of the little moments throughout this chapter where it's just her sort of like thought process of what she's doing and what it could mean in sort of like the grand scheme of things, and how just the lengths that she's going through, and how Heiran views what she's doing. And as far as Kyoshi thinking about sort of like her honor as the Avatar and what this really means for her going forward in the future, and will she able to be sort of recover from this, and how this is something that like you mentioned, she's not willing to take Rangi along for this journey, because this is something that definitely would go against what Rangi really stands for, or what Rangi believes that the Avatar really stands for. So that whole sort of conflict here that Kyoshi is trying to sort of do here, in order to sort of figure out, and this might be because she's really trying to get some way of confessing what's truly happening here with all also without also involving Yoon in some sort of way. So it could still that still can be a consideration here as far as like something that she's trying to avoid. But up until this point, this is what she believes is the right thing to do, and she has concocted this plan with everyone in mind. Some people aren't in on the full sort of plan here, as we can see with Rangi, but this is the path that she's currently chosen to go down.
Yeah, the only like issue I would maybe have with this is that they never come back to this incident that Kyoshi did this to Rangi, like, because Rangi isn't in the book for like the next like 80-ish pages, because we have to have the whole like interlude with Yoon still, the full rest of the backstory with Karuk, the whole Huazo story, and how the political plot comes to an end. And only like in the second last chapter of the book, basically, does Rangi come back in, and there's like a time skip little thing that happens, and they just sort of imply that it's all been patched up. I suppose it's roughly there just because they get across the idea that they just explained like that Rangi will forgive you within a week. But I think the fact that they've had two things happen like back to back, that Rangi just showed a sign that she'll forgive you, and then you earthbend her into the ground. It's like I felt that needed to be addressed to a degree, because it's not just the fact that Kyoshi did another thing again, but it's the fact that Rangi almost like values Kyoshi's honor more than Kyoshi values her own honor. So I really did feel that they needed to come back to it, and even when Rangi comes back into the story, they don't address it, and it's just like implied that off screen it was all resolved and all went fine. It just feels like this kind of plot point is just kind of ended at this point, because like Heiron isn't even in the rest of the book after this point, and like there's still like a third of the book left, and just pretty much this is like Heiron's last appearance in the book. Here's this page of just kind of saying the whole idea of what did she say? Yeah, we have no need of mercy, only justice, and the whole idea of like honor cannot be coveted too dearly, young lady. Sometimes it must be laid down for the good of others. Um, I don't know. What were your thoughts on that? Just that, for the most part, this is like the end of like the Heiron Rangi plot for the most part in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that that doesn't really get touched much, sort of later on, and this was after the whole sort of forgiveness. I mean, it was definitely, it was a nice way, or not nice, but it was, a pretty poignant way of sort of like ending this sort of, chapter, and ending, this with Kyoshi's sort of big resolve. But it is something that, definitely could have been, I guess, sort of touched in more detail. And I don't know if it's something that just sort of like was like, just got cut out somehow or something like that, because it would seem like it's something that needs to be addressed. Just the whole idea of just this sort of, side quest basically of, trying to figure out the truth, that, and not necessarily, knowing how it's going to end. I mean, I don't know. I think there definitely could have been some way to bring that back in. That, I mean, I don't see it being something that would, again, cause like a huge rift or anything like that. I don't think that it would be up on that level, depending on, what was the actual sort of like outcome of events. I think that's really the main thing that would have, swayed this one way or the other for
Mm.
me.
Yeah, I just kind of linger on it a little bit as kind of like being kind of at least somewhat of criticism, because I do think it was important in this book because of all the setup that you had with the idea of like that there are places she'll never go, so you'll have to sort of go there for her. And especially with like ultimately the decisions Kyoshi makes with regards to how she's going to be the Avatar going forward, which seems to be that yes, I will go to those places. It feels like they never really address between Rangi and Kyoshi that is Rangi okay that this is just going to be the way Kyoshi does things, and that she'll have to like stay on the sidelines while this happens. Um, that's why I felt like something was needed here, because especially this moment was directly like about that. Kyoshi is leaving her out as she goes to kidnap people, which she doesn't want her to be involved in. And obviously it ends up being like a mistake for Kyoshi here, as we find out, like a big mistake. Um, but I still feel like just with the way the overall book went, with the sort of the plot of Heiron and Kyoshi having a lot of interesting scenes together, and like talking about how to deal with Rangi. Um, I think there should have been some sort of like final scene like thing. Um, and as well as that, like just the whole idea of with like Heiron, that we just like, okay, she's gonna recover. Um, but I would have liked to have seen like, does she restore her honor? Does she get her top knot back after this whole event is done, or was that like for the rest of her
Mm.
life she's going to be honorless or whatever? Um, and this is where like I'll start to bring up maybe some of the things with regards to this book's 100 pages shorter than the first book, and it's starting to come into play here that it's beginning to feel that way. But I don't know. What were your thoughts on that? I suppose just like the Heiron side of things. Like, how did you take the her removing her top knot, and with regards to where the book ends? Like, does she put it back, or was that for life, and that the honor of the family, the clan, is on Rangi now?
I don't know, because I think it's, I don't know, the whole idea of, I guess, Fire Nation people sort of getting back their honors when those sort of like things that's always just with like using Zuko as like the perfect example of like how did he really when he finally gained back his honor and he felt that he was worthy of everything that he might have actually been owed, even though he went through so much stuff. Like how does that sort of progression happens, and is that something that's even necessarily needed as sort of like an older character? Like is there a big sort of like to do da of that whole sort of like process? Like, I mean, it definitely seems like it's something that's more important for like a younger character versus an older, more established character. Like using like Iroh as another example. Like, we had the whole idea of them both cutting off their top knots when they had to sort of like lie low and things, but eventually seems like they both regained their honor to some degree. So what was the process for Iroh getting back his honor? I don't know if there's anything that really explains that, or if there is, I definitely would be interested in knowing that. So I don't know. I mean, I think it is something that is open ended and is worth exploring. I don't know if that's as necessary as far as like some of the other things, as far as like sort of the whole idea of like Kyoshi sort of going off on these sort of like side jaunts that she can't bring Rangi with because of whatever reason. I think that's something that page count would maybe affect more, as far as like giving a better resolution to their their personal interpersonal sort of like communication and their resolution on those specific topics. Like, how is she going to deal with that going forward in the future, or is that something that would be addressed in future books if we ever got that?
Yeah, because there are a few things that definitely like I'd like to see resolved and covered if there was a third book. Just because like it clearly sets up that like, oh, some stuff in the Earth Kingdom, Kyoshi definitely wants to make some progress there, from the very early chapters and so on. So yeah, obviously we'll discuss this more as we go through the kind of final third of the book, on the next podcast. But yeah, that's basically been it for this week's podcast. So it's been myself and Greg. So thanks for listening to this podcast, and bye.
Bye bye.